First, we have Alexander Crawford, CEO of Theracule. Welcome.
Hello, and thank you.
So the first question is, of course, which problem does your company solve?
Yeah, I'd actually like to start with a question to the audience, and that is, how many of you have a family member or a friend or a colleague who has epilepsy? It's actually about 1% of the population that has epilepsy, and that's about 80 million people worldwide. Over a quarter of those, or about 33% of those, a third of those, have epileptic seizures that are not treatable with all the current drugs. And that's about over 20 million people worldwide. And the largest groups within that population are patients with focal onset seizures and childhood epilepsy syndromes. And there are well over 25 anti-epileptic drugs on the market, but they only work with a small number of different mechanisms, about 4: sodium channels, calcium channels, glutamate, GABA. And so in order to treat all these drug-resistant epilepsy patients, we really do need new epilepsy drugs that work with new mechanisms. And a very good recent example that many of you may be familiar with is cannabidiol. Cannabidiol works through a still yet not completely characterized mechanism, has projected peak sales of about $3 billion, and is approved to treat only 3 different childhood epilepsy syndromes.
And if you were to explain to an investor why they should invest in your company, what would you say?
Yes. Okay, well, we have 2 drug candidates that we're developing for treatment-resistant epilepsy. Both of them have novel mechanisms of action that are different than all the currently approved epilepsy drugs. We're developing both as orphan drugs, and both have potential to be eligible for priority review vouchers. I would say both also have potential to be blockbuster or near blockbuster products if they are successful in the clinic. We have one of those is currently in an ongoing phase 2 clinical trial for Dravet syndrome. And that is a repurposed GPCR agonist that we found in vivo screening. And the other is a botanical drug, or botanically derived drug, based on molecules, let's say underappreciated molecules from curcuma, so-called tomerones. So these are not curcumins. And this will go into the clinic next year in a phase 2 trial with Oren Davinsky at NYU, who some of you may know is responsible for the clinical trials that led to the development of cannabidiol for GW. And so we are developing both of those drugs. We have a pretty good team that we've built up to support that clinical development. In Norway, we're working together with Smurud Medical Research as our clinical development partner, and we have additional clinical development partners in the US. In addition to Oren, who's really one of the leading folks in the epilepsy field, we have 2 pretty senior people in the epilepsy space. One is Henrik Klickgaard, who's right across the water here in Copenhagen, now retired from UCB. He led the development of 3 blockbuster epilepsy drugs at UCB. And also Eleanor Ben-Menachem up in Göteborg, who's going to be who's the scientific advisor for us and also our clinical partner for another phase 2 trial there.
Okay, and the last question is, are you looking for capital, and how much?
We always are. And so currently we're raising around about 3 to 4 million. Our current seed investor, C Squared Pharma, that's an API company in Ireland, will follow on. We also have a new investor that will join from Norway for part of that. But we're indeed looking for 1 to 2 additional investors, preferably in the Nordic space, to help close the round. We do have some interest from pharma companies, but I think it's too early. We would rather bring pharma companies only on board as strategic investors after we show proof of concept in these trials. And that's the key point. For 3 to 4 million, we're going to be able to show proof of concept data in a total of 3 clinical trials for 2 different drugs. And that is a relatively unique proposition, I think.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you.